Hi. So did you know that there's a relationship between vampires and your ego? Maybe you already know, but I wanted to talk about this a little bit. So vampires are sort of immortal, right? Not quite, but sort of. The thing is, though, they're already dead. So they're dead, but they have some sort of mimicry of being alive. And the only way they can stay sort of alive is to eat the lifeblood energy of real living humans. The idea of immortality for a lot of people can be synonymous with power in many ways, depending on how you think of vampires, very culturally specific. Vampires can be considered powerful as well. And sometimes they're given extra human strength and extra human speed and all these other kinds of things, but that's not for every single vampire according to cultural context. The thing about immortality and ego is the ego doesn't want to die. I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? And I would say that the ego not wanting to die is the one benefit of having an ego on your body. Because your unconscious body doesn't, you could say like your spirit, you could say the highest vibration version of yourself probably doesn't see physical death in the same way that your ego does. And the fact that your ego doesn't want to die, and the fact that your body has this ego is basically part of what keeps you safe on Earth. Like you will instinctively run out of the way of danger, right? You won't go towards it unless you've been spelled. The ego can easily be spelled anyway. And vampires can spell. Isn't that interesting? So the ego doesn't want to die. In many ways, you could say the vampire doesn't want to die either. And the ego on steroids is kind of like a vampire. And there's many people who actually house vampires inside of their own systems. I'll go into that. So I've actually seen vampiric energy, which is an entity that's been around for hundreds of years. And this entity has developed a personality and is very cunning. So imagine you have the wisdom of like 400 years of lifetime. Can't you dupe a human who's 40 years old or 14 years old much more easily than a fellow regular human? Vampires are in many ways a permutation of con artist, but I won't go into that right now. So this kind of vampiric entity will use up all the life force energy of a human, and through that human being a host, take all the energy of the people near them. And if this is a sexual vampire, they will take the sexual energy of the people near them. If it's a non-sexual vampire, then they'll take other kinds of energy of the people near them, including the so-called family members of the so-called human that really is a vampire. So when that human host dies, the vampiric entity just enters a new host. And they find them young. And by growing inside of that human when the human is young, it changes that human's ego personality to benefit the vampire. So this is a real thing. This kind of vampiric energy is a real thing. And that is related to, so this is a very powerful kind of entity. And this is related to anyone's ego. Egos are your in-house entity. There are people shouting outside. They're shouting about egos being the in-house entity. So your ego will always be your in-house entity. You're going to have to deal with your ego no matter what. And it's like when you have self-mastery, you have to make decisions and take actions that You could say the other part of you, you could say maybe like the witness part of you, if you like that language, or you could say your inner child or your highest vibrational self, your true self, whatever, the aspect of you that's not your ego. They need to be able to control the situation and make decisions for you and decide to take actions for you that goes against what your ego wants. That's self-mastery in many ways. If you're controlled by your ego, which is almost everyone on earth, then you end up saying and doing things and attracting situations to you through your own entities inside of your shadow that serve your ego. So if you think you're a victim, okay, most victims don't even like to think that they're a victim, but whatever. If you like being a victim, then you're going to attract situations where you are actually victimized. People steal from you, people touch you in ways you don't like. You're berated at work, or you have to take the blame for something you didn't do. This kind of stuff that makes people feel like a victim, you're going to attract that because it's going to reinforce your ego. Your ego likes to survive even when it goes against the best interests of the host. So in many ways, your ego can become parasitical on your body. Your ego can become parasitical to your inner child. And in many ways, your inner child is synonymous with your body, your physical body. So a lot of times what people do through their egos is really, really bad for their bodies. It just like eats up the life force energy of their bodies. And how many people have died early through disease and stress and a bunch of things that happened because they followed what their egos wanted. So this is very similar to, you can say, a vampire who uses the life force energy of others around them, right? Your ego uses the life force energy of your own body. And in that way, it wants to stay, in its way, immortal. It can't be immortal, but it wants to be immortal. And in a lot of movies and stories that you've probably watched, the more powerful you are, the more money you have, the more you get interested in extending your life in a very artificial way. Weird things like cryogenically freezing your head, weird stuff like that. That is tantamount to a fear of death, which is a very powerless position. This is a non-self-mastery position. This is a very, very, I'm a victim of life kind of position, which is interesting. It's interesting, right? Because the vampire is considered the predator. The vampire is considered like the narcissist. The vampire is considered the perpetrator. Preys on real life breathing human beings who are still alive. But the vampire also has this kind of shadow in that it can never be human. You can't go back. Once you become a vampire, can you become human again? No. You give up all chance of being human again. And on top of that, you're allergic to the sunlight. Again, culturally specific. Not all vampires are like that. Meaning, in this case, consciousness. So you have to stay low consciousness forever. So a low consciousness person will be afraid of their own death. And a low consciousness person will be afraid of especially ego death, because we face ego death way more often than actual like threats to our life usually. So there's some sort of correlation between the ego that wants to live forever at cost to the body that hosts the ego, and the vampire who wants to live forever, who drinks the blood of other human beings at cost to the other human beings around it. But it pays this price of being a low consciousness forever, and that's the same of someone with an ego that they don't allow to go through ego death and rebirth. So if you don't allow yourself to go through ego death and rebirth, the cost you pay is your ego gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And the correlation to that is your entities become stronger and stronger and stronger too, actually. And so you probably have more stress, more disease. Your life probably sucks in many ways, and you feel really, really stuck, and you're definitely not living your spiritual mission or anything like that. But the other cost you pay, which is so interesting, is that you stay low consciousness forever. So wherever your ego formed at, whatever consciousness level your ego formed at, you will be stuck there. And that's your health. That's the cost you pay for wanting to not allow for natural ego death and rebirth. And most humans have many opportunities to have ego death and rebirth, and you have had one in your life at some point. For some people, it is a divorce. For some people, it is when they are let go from a job. For some people, it is when they graduate from university and they kind of don't know what to do with their lives. For some people, it's the death of a parent. For some people, it's the death of a pet. So you've gone through some kind of ego death at some point in your life, and you've probably, if you healed from that situation, you've probably felt better for it. Like, not that you're happy that that situation occurred, but if you healed from that situation, you probably feel like a better version of yourself. So you can see that when you resist this ego death, when you resist what should naturally occur, and ego death can happen moment by moment. I mean, it can happen in really small circumstances that have nothing to do with these catastrophic life events. Ego death can happen when you don't get what you want. Ego death can happen when you say something special to someone and they don't hear you. Ego death can happen easily 10 times an hour. So when you don't allow yourself to go through the ego death and feel the pain that is that ego death, and then realize that you can hold yourself through that ego death, but when instead you distract and you go, oh, I'm going to eat something now. I'm going to go on my phone now, right? I'm going to start thinking now. So many people think in order to avoid feeling their feelings. And the cost they pay is they're never able to access their intuition. And then they become really egotistical about it. And they think that like my ability to overthink is my superpower, That's ego. So for many people, because they resist ego death, the kinds of micro ego deaths that can happen in any moment, like 10 times an hour, they go into these other habits that reinforce the ego. These addictive, compulsive, avoiding the present moment kind of habits. And this is like literally the opposite of self-mastery. So I want to conclude with this idea that immortality doesn't really give you the kind of power that popular media might emphasize, because the shadow of that is so strong. Nothing lasts forever, including planet Earth, including your own existence as you know it, including the feeling that you're avoiding in the moment. That doesn't last forever either. And your ego staying the same in perpetuity costs you. And therefore you're feeding your ego as if it were a vampire on you, as if it were parasitical on you, much like a prototypical vampire preys on others. Immortality comes with a strong shadow, like a vampire comes with intense weakness. Can't even stand the sun, right? Can't even stand some drop of consciousness. Cannot live unless feeding off of others. So there's no life force energy of their own. They're actually already dead and won't accept that in many ways. So immortality is pretty much, in many ways, like defined by an aversion of death, or fear of death, aversion of death, fear of death. And if you carry that within you, not necessarily your physical death, but that too, but more I'm emphasizing the micro ego deaths that can happen moment to moment, then you feed your own life force energy to this false idea of the immortality of your ego. And many people do this in things like staying at a job for too long, correct? Staying in a relationship for too long. You can imagine the kind of person who wants to stay in touch with someone from high school, but they have nothing in common with that person anymore, but they kind of want to keep it alive, and they keep reminiscing, and they get stuck in the past and this kind of stuff. I know other people who are really stuck on trash, like physical trash, and they won't throw it away. Things that are clearly trash because you've thrown it in the bin, But many things in many people's lives are actually trash. Have you ever moved from one house to another house and you just had boxes and boxes of junk that you moved to the new house and you didn't even open it for years? That's trash. You don't even know what's in those boxes. And that is the lack of consciousness that is akin to the vampire being allergic to the sun. Like that's trash that you don't even want to look at. And that kind of trash, you think it's something that you want to hang on to. It's something that your ego feels more comfortable keeping than letting go of. But that trash sucks your energy. And I think many people who have done a good cleanup of a closet or of their whole house, or have traveled a lot and had to live out of a suitcase, so they had to keep to the bare minimum. There's a psychic cleanliness, a psychic lightness that comes with keeping things that are just necessary in the present moment. And this is a practice of ego death. So that's the talk. Immortality, vampirism, and your ego. There's some sort of relationship, and a fear of death is one of them. All right, bye.